Hi everybody, I've been asked to paint this gorgeous basset hound. His name is Basil, and I'm just going to take you through how I go about doing a dog portrait. Okay, the lady who owns this lovely dog, Julia, has sent me this photograph. It's a lovely pose. Part of the foot is missing there, so what I've done is I've gone onto the internet and I found a similar pose of a dog with the foot intact. So I've been able to then draw that more accurately, if you can see on my paper. Okay, so sometimes bits of the photograph are missing and you have to work with that. Okay, the other thing to consider is this photograph, the lighting, doesn't quite show the colour of the dog as well. So the owner, Julia, sent me some photographs in better light, so that I can actually see what colour the dog actually is. Because when I went on the internet to look at basset hounds, as you can see, this dog has got a more rust orangey colour coat and this one, you see. I'm not going to use these images, I'm just looking at the colour. Compared to this one of Basil, the ear on this dog is quite orangey and rusty, whereas Basil is a more sort of sort of buff, soft brown colour. So before I start anything, I need to mix some colour swatches to get the feel of what colour I'm actually going to use to paint Basil's fur. So to do that, what I like to do is get a piece of watercolour paper, the same watercolour paper that I'm going to paint the actual dog on. This is cold pressed, also known as knot. It's Saunders Waterford paper. It's £90 in weight, also known as 200 GSM. £90 equates with 200 GSM in paper weights. And it's 100% cotton rag, and I've stretched it the night before in cold water, and so it's now bone dry and tight as a drum. I've got a video on how to stretch paper. The link is in the description of this video. So with the same paper, I'm going to punch some holes using this little hole punch. You can use a dual hole punch as well. I leave a bit of space around each hole, and then this is what I'm going to use to try and get a good match on this colour for the dog. So I've got my dog there. So just zoom in a little bit on it. So the colours I'm after are basically, what colour mix is this going to be? And what colour mix are the ears going to be? Because the rest of the dog is a greyish white, so I can manage that. It's just this tone of brown that I want to get. Okay, so let's start by, I'm just going to pick up a small round brush, moisten it really well in my jug of water. Then I'm going to wipe the handle so no beads run down, and then re-dip in the water. And I'm going to pick up, let's say start with what I think is a close match. So I've got some raw Sienna, pick up some burnt Umber, let's try those two. Right, so what I do is I put that piece of white paper on part of the dog's fur that I want to match. Now that's, actually let me zoom out, that's way too dark and way too brown. Okay, let's see if it matches anywhere on the ear. Let's see if that's a better match on the ear there. Well, it's still too orangey. So overall, I feel I need to reduce the orangeness of this. So opposite that colour on the colour wheel, opposite that sort of brown, burnt umber, raw sienna, is French Ultramarine Blue. So what I've done now is I've added more water, and if I bring this up to you, it might be better to see. I've added more water and a bit more French Ultramarine Blue. So let's try it now. Well, that's a bit closer, a little bit closer. So I think that's quite close for the overall front of his head there and most of his face. and I'll just add darker tones for the shadows going down there. Let's try for the ear colour now, because that's going to be a predominant colour. So again, I'll put my little hole there over part of the ear. Now, that's a close-ish match, but it's not dark enough, so I'll just add some more strong pigment. Just a slightly stronger mix. Right, that's not bad. That's not bad. So that was, you know, burnt umber, raw sienna, and French ultramarine blue. So I know roughly what I'm aiming for now. So generally, it's worth doing these little swatches. That was way too orange in colour. This is a truer colour of the dog's fur. So I'm happy to go with that now. Right. So, as I mentioned, a lot of the dog, he's got, no, essentially it's white fur, you know, white fur. There's another picture of Basil. It's white fur on his chest, but there are sort of some shadows there, as you can see, there's a shadow under his neck. So I'd need to put that as a sort of soft grey. So I'll just mix up my shadow colour of soft grey, which I generally, on animal fur, I use French Ultramarine Blue, quite dilute. And then, as you can see, this is how I choose it. So opposite French Ultramarine Blue, if you go right through the middle of the circle, and out the other side, burnt umber is there, raw umber is there, and right on the extreme you've got something between a cadmium scarlet and a cadmium orange. So a little bit each of those colours would give you a nice shadow colour. But I want to keep this muted. So I'm going to use more of an earth colour. The more muted the colour, the more they appear in the middle of this colour wheel by Stephen Quiller. On the outside, the hue is very bright. So I'm going to go for some burnt umber with my ultramarine to give me that soft brown grey. Just splash Basil with some blue. Okay, so a little bit of burnt umber, quite dilute. I'm adding it in small increments. Let's get in there a little bit more. Right. Now that's quite strong, so I'm adding some more water to it to dilute that down. So this is the grey. Yeah, that's about as strong as I want to go with that, because it sort of matches that grey there on the chest, Basil's chest. You can see that's quite a good match there and there. So again, it's just worth getting roughly in the, you know, getting your colours roughly worked out, you know, before you head off. So this is my outline now for Basil. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to wet the whole inside of this dog with clear water. But before I start, I'm just going to rub out or reduce the strength of some of these pencil drawing marks that I put on. I need to see where I'm going, but I don't want this pencil mark to be a bit ugly, you know, and too visible when I finish the painting. So I'm just going to softly chamfer away some of that graphite, very gently. Don't need to worry so much in the ears because they are very dark anyway, but on the face, the lit side of the face, which is the left hand side of the face, has more light on it. He's more in shadow on the right, as you can see. I'll take some of the pencil down a little bit. I'm just going to rub that away now. Okay, so the wetting takes quite a bit of time. I'm going to add a lot of water to the centre of the dog, and then I can quickly share it out. I use the centre as my sort of, you know, main depot for water, and then I share it out to all the other parts of the dog. I've got about a size 10 brush here to do this, for this size painting, this size image. You can hear it's raining today. we're having Storm Callum is coming into Wales, so we've had a lot of flooding in places. As usual, the reason why I'm soaking my image is so that when my first washes go on, they will stay soft and I don't have any hard edges. At the beginning of my painting, I just want to indicate some shadow areas and the main blocks of colour for the dog. I won't be attempting to get any detail at all in this first stage. The detail will come near the end. Right, I need to swap to a slightly smaller brush now because I need to get into those little toes and nails and things. Because I'd like some of the soft grey to bleed into these places, just to start unifying all of the dog's body, you know, with each other, the nails, the feet, the chest, everything. Just get that little curve there. This is cotton rag paper, and so it absorbs a lot of water, a lot more than wood pulp paper, and it stays wetter for longer. Okay, so that gives you more thinking time and more painting time before things start to dry up and go damp, and that stops the flow of paint when things are damp. And you can risk getting backruns if you continue to add wetter washes than the paper is wet. You'll get a conflict and then you'll get a back run. You only get back runs if you introduce a more dilute wash to an area of paper that's gone a bit damp. Okay, if it's stayed nice and moist like mine, which I'll show you in a second, then you have less risk of getting back runs as you continue to paint. Just need a little bit more attention to detail here on his feet. Because I'm only painting inside the dog's outline, the paint that I apply will only travel to the edge of that wetted area. It won't go any further. So you've got a bit of control, even though we're using wet into wet technique. So you could call it controlled wet into wet. If I were to just paint on the soft grey and the soft brown straight onto dry paper, I would end up with a hard edge with every stroke I made, which is a bit of a nuisance, because I want everything to be soft now. Okay, so I've wet the dog, as you can see. There's that moisture all over the dog now, okay? See? It's not too runny, it's just a nice sheen. In fact, just before I start, just to give me some more time, I will just run a little extra moisture all around the outer edges, because they dry quicker than the centre. So I'm just going to give myself a bit more moisture in these areas to give me some more time to paint and talk you through this. I don't want the surface to be sloppy and run in with water, because then that makes the paint bleed too far and there's no control when you place the washes. So even though I'm adding this extra bit of water, I'm going to make sure that I give it a few seconds or half a minute to soak in again into that reservoir under the surface before I start applying washes. So basically, you know, you can wet it once and then you can wet it twice, and it'll still be, you know, it'll be okay to paint on. Because in a sense, you're painting on, you know, a textile really. This is cotton. Okay, let's look at it now. Yeah, see, it's just got a bit more moisture in there now. Looking a lot healthier, right down to his paws. All of him is the same degree of moisture. Has the same degree of moisture. This is important. Okay, so let's get some grey in. So as I'm looking at Basil, the light is on the left-hand side, but I've got to do something with his chest down here. Okay, I can see that left-hand side of the chest is lit, and then there's a lump here indicating that curve of his chest on the right is sort of in shadow. Same with his legs and feet. I can put some shadow there and a bit of shadow on this muzzle. Okay, so let's get that grey. The grey starts to separate when it's sitting on the palette, so you need to mix it all back up again. This is a size 6 brush. So I'm just going to drop in very pale grey on this left hand side of his white, you know, fur on his chest, and down into his paws, and on the right side of his paws. And I'm dropping this grey into those toenails, and right on the bottom of the pads that will be touching the floor. They'd probably be a bit darker, but I'm leaving part of the paw white because he's got white paws. So I'm aiming for the right hand side of each of these little toes and leave the rest alone. I'll get a natural sort of organic bleed then. That looks hopefully nice and contrived. There'd be a bit of shadow under there, you know, under his jowls, because his snout is coming out, and there'd be a cast shadow under that. I want to leave that quite white, but I'll have a little bit of, just a tiny bit of shadow right on the rim to give the feeling of curve coming over there. And finally a bit of shadow on this back paw. And again, this is not the finished stage, this is just, I zoom in, these are the primary washes. So that's how it's looking there. Let's zoom in on the face a bit now. So I want to put a little bit of grey across the nose there, a little bit. And a little bit down there. I'm going to leave that white. I'm going to leave that alone. Okay, so the next thing I want to do now is get some of the actual dog colour on. You know, the tan, that buff colour I mixed. So I'm going to mix up a bigger colour of that now. So it was raw sienna, burnt sienna. I'm going to mix up what I've got on the palette here just to share it in. Some French Ultramarine Blue. I just want to get some, you know, brown on and see where I'm going with this. So that's not bad. So let's get some colour on the face now. Again, because I'm painting flat, this won't bleed everywhere. It'll bleed a little bit, but it'll give me a nice soft start to this dog painting. So I want this to come all the way down. Let's get colour where I see this brown on the ears. And on that side of his leg, definitely that's got brown in it. My paper is still moist, you see, because I put 2 layers of water on it. So I can quietly paint along without stressing out and know that everything will stay moist for the time being. I'll just zoom out a bit more, sorry. Okay, right, let's get him more. Now this side, this is the paler side, so I'm going to be careful not to lose the white on his jowls there, on his nose as well, on his snout. That back of the little leg is actually brown there, so that ties into his ear there. There's a little bit of that brown in his lips, and up on his whole nose will be black eventually, so I can get away with some brown there as well. And on the left hand side of his snout he's got quite a few brown patches and markings, so I'll just start to indicate those now. But there is definitely a little white piece there that I don't want to lose, because that's coming round there. Right, under the eye. A few more brown marks there. Right, I'll leave that for now. Then under there, that's definitely darker. Brown, and that's the very dark sort of cleft right under the middle of his neck there. And there are a few little splodges there. Okay, so he looks a bit patchy, so what we need to do now is just very gently let him run. I'm just going to zoom out so that I can show you how I do this. So just lift it up. And let's see, just at about 45 degrees this is, okay? And this will do a very soft bleed and run, and by millimetre the paint will creep down. Then I'm going to do the same thing, 45 degrees, and then tilt it on the side. This obliterates my brush strokes and it just fuses the paint a little bit more softly than I could achieve with a brush. Then you know, this vertical now, so again I'm at 45 degrees holding it like that, giving it about 20 seconds or so to run. Oops, sorry. And then finally that side as well. A little bit back that way. Okay, so before I stop, ready for the next stage, I'm going to zoom in, and what I like to do now is lift out some very hard white, crisp white highlights where I see them here on the dog. There's some there, There's some on the nose, definitely. The side of the wet nose, you know, there. The ear there. There's a bit of a one there. There's a little one in his nose. And we could just get away with some real crisp ones in there, you know, artistic license, and on his, the lip side, on the left side of his paws, you know. And there's a highlight there, isn't there? Okay. So I'm going to lift those out now before the paper goes. As you can see, there's still a bit of shine on that, you see. I can lift some colour out of that now with a piece of dry tissue. I'm going to twist it really hard so that it's, you know, firm and sharp. And let me zoom in to where I want to lift out. So on the ear there, I'm going to press that in. There's a definite highlight there. There's a bit of a one on that rim there. All of this side of the, can you see those highlights now? All of the side of this jowl. I'm using it narrow like that because I need to do a sharp line. And under there, and on the side of his head where the ear joins the head, it's quite white. Then on his crown, there are those highlights. And actually over that eye, there's a bit of a one. These might seep back in, you know, so you need to press in again because the paint is still moist and is still moving. Watercolour has got a life of its own, and it continues to bleed, you know. After a few minutes, though, it will stop. It will stop. Let me just go in there, pick up that nice white highlight I was talking about. And there's a bit of a rim on this. Yeah, this is paler, so I'm going to make a highlight there. I need a new piece of tissue now. That one's gone a bit dirty, so I'm just going to twist another piece of fresh tissue and keep pressing those highlights. And in amongst those blotches of brown, there will be white. So I want to keep that very white. Let's lift out some on his paws as well now. And on the paws a bit. Right, let's keep some really nice crisp white highlights in the chest there, especially where that curve happens and it goes into shadow into the right. So I'm pressing quite hard just to keep some nice white highlights there as well, and on his left side of his paws. Okay, and there's a bit of a highlight sort of in this floppy bit of skin under there. That's quite light. You see this, isn't it? That's quite light there. Sorry there, that's quite light. So I'm sticking with it, you know, I'm not going away yet, because as I say, bits that I've done earlier are starting to seep back in a little bit, and you've got to get in there before they disappear. Alright? Definitely that lovely white highlight on the head. Oh, and there's a few more on the ear on this left hand side. Can lighten those. They've got sort of rim light on them. Okay, and I think that's about it now. There's a little bit in the nose, nostril here. A bit there as well. And I think I'm going to stop there. So this is how he looks. Let me just get the natural light on him here. This is how he looks at this stage. Okay, so I'm going to leave that dry naturally, and then later on I'm going to come in and start work on individual pieces like the ears, the head and the paws, etc. We'll do the eyes and the nose last of all. Okay, see you in the next clip. Hi there. Now the dog is bone dry. I left it dry for an hour or so, and then I give it a very gentle hair dry, very, very, very gentle, because I think heat does spoil the quality of the paint if you use it too much and too strongly. So when I touch it now with this part of my thumb, if I feel any coolness in there, that suggests that there's still a bit of moisture in the depths of the paper, and so I wouldn't continue if I felt that coolness was still there. Okay, so that's a way of testing it. It might look bone dry, but if you go like that and it feels cool, there's probably still moisture in there. Okay, so, but it's dry to the touch now. So what I'm going to do is, at this point, I can safely now rub away any of my pencil lines, my drawing. Rub that away, because we've got the outline, we can see where we're going. I'm not going to rub away the inside part of the drawing, because I still need that. But I always rub away pencil lines as soon as I can when they're no longer needed. It's like taking the stabilizers off your bike when you've suddenly got balance, you know. Just take them away because they add a more painterly look to your painting, obviously. Right, so rub the pencil lines out now. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to focus on the whole of the face. So what I'll be doing is I'll be wetting all of the face. I'll be leaving the ears out, and then I'll be doing some deeper colour work and some shadow work on the dog's face, wet into wet. Okay, so I'm just going to get my palette ready and see you in the next clip. Right, to paint the head, I usually like to work upside down, because when I work upside down, my seeing is better. I just see shapes, colour, patches and tones a lot more easily than when I'm working the right way up. This is because when I work upside down, my right brain gets a chance to just see things as they are, and doesn't get hung up on what the feature is, you know, whether it's the nose or the temple or the forehead, etc. So, excuse me, if you can bear with me, I've got the dog upside down and I've got my 2 reference photos there to help me to do this. So I'm just going to concentrate on the face, only this area here. So I'm going to very softly and very gently re-wet this whole area with clear water. So that'll include those droopy white jowls, the side of his face, and up to his crown, that lovely domed head that this dog Basil has got. I'm refilling my water, gliding it on very lightly, very softly. There's no scrubbing action here, and this way I don't disturb the wash that I put on earlier on. So as you can see, there's moisture gone on here, but the wash underneath is still visible and is still intact. The best way to achieve this is by using 100% cotton rag paper and leaving your washes get bone dry in between applying a wash of water and then further colour, as I'm going to do now. If I wasn't filming this, I'd be turning my board to be able to wet things more easily, but I don't want to keep making you twist your head around and around, and it's easier for filming if I do this. So let me just show you the area that I've moistened now. Can you see there? So I've just moistened that long part of the front, of the head. Excuse me. Okay, so let's get the dog back in place so I can see what I'm doing. And the other reference photo. Right, as I'm looking at this now, it's dried out a tiny bit on the first area I wetted. So I'm just going back in very carefully with clear water again, and just giving it a bit more of a moistening. Okay, so I'm ready now to add some darker colour. So the colour I've been using is raw sienna. With some burnt sienna. And then I'd softened it, I'd muted it down with a bit of blue, if you can remember. So I'm just going to make a big puddle of that now so that I don't run out while I do this next stage of the dog's face. It's not going to be very runny. It's going to be about that consistency, which is very thin cream, I'd say. I'm just going to check my colour against the dog. That's not bad, because it will dry paler. Okay, so I'm going to start putting in more now, more of this. Hope that's showing up okay. I'll try and zoom in a bit more for you now. Okay. This is going to look obviously a little bit strange because it's upside down. But if you just bear with me, just go with this. I'm going to paint the whole of the nose because that will eventually be black. So it doesn't hurt to paint a little bit of the colour that precedes it in there. Some of that brown goes down into the jowls. Nice and soft gradation from the white of his jowls to the brown bit in the middle. A little bit more there and there. Then there is a few little specks of brown. If they bleed too much, I will pick the bleed up with a thirsty brush in a minute. I'm just going to get this darker colour on first. As quickly as I can so that I can start playing around with it. I'm going to leave the eyes for now. The highlights that I took off earlier on, I'll be, I just painted a wrong bit there. I'll be relifting those in a second. I'm using the very tip of my brush here. And that brown comes down to the eye about there. Stuff underneath. And then the brown starts turning into that sort of white then. So I don't want to lose that too much. Little specks of white, some specks of brown there. Okay, let's see how we're doing now. Now this is too dark here, I feel, so I'm just going to pat it out with a tissue. And I didn't want that there. It will be dark anyway, so I'll just blend it in for now. Didn't want that. Okay, so as I'm looking at the face now, how are we doing? Well, there's definitely some darker brown around the eyes. So I'm going to make a more gooey, viscous mix of the burnt umber, the raw umber, and a little bit of French Ultramarine Blue to just darken around the dog's eyes to prepare it for the work I'll be doing in the next phase. And as you can see, it's softening as I'm putting the paint on. I'll just zoom in a bit. It is softening a bit, but because I'm using a smaller brush, it's not bleeding too far. Okay. So we're getting soft, layers of slightly darker colour starting to build form, and there's a bit of a darker ridge there, and there's a sort of cleft, a bit of a V coming down like that from the centre of the dog's head. So I want to try and express that. While it's still moist. And I'm just touching up those little speckles again that I see there. Now for the black of the nose, I'm going to go for much stronger burnt umber again, mixed in with much more viscous French ultramarine blue. That gives us a very nice dark, you know, it's nicer than using tube black, which can be a bit dead. So I'm going to get that nose shape in and play with it in a minute. And again, I can do all of this slow work because my paper is soaking wet. Well, it's not soaking wet, but it's very moist. It's had, you know, another layer of, 2 layers of moisture painted onto it. And this blackness of the nose I'm putting on will bleed, you know, and be a sort of a nice setting for the harder black I'll put on in the next stage. So all of these are just softening preliminary patches of colour that will support further work then as we go along. Wherever I see a darkish, you know, tone, I'm trying to drop it in while it's still moist, so it has a chance to soften into the parts that I've already painted, and it will look less, you know, hard. Right, I'm going to see what it looks like now. Okay, so we've got a bit of shape coming, and again I'm going to let the whole face run now. Let that all run. It's at about 70 degrees, my board is tilted at 70 degrees, letting that fuse in. Let's let it run from the side now as well. I'm actually holding it at 90 degrees, let it really come across now. Give it a few seconds in that position. Again, this is not the finished stage. This is another underveil of soft colour with some tones now coming in, ready for the hard accent work that'll come at the end. So this is how I try and get depth in the eyes. You know, I'm painting a darker sort of area around a moist part of the fur, around that part of the head, so that we've got a nice setting, you know, for the eye when we come to paint that. So I'm going to just let's see, zoom in a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to leave that now to dry and come back, and I'll start tightening up and getting the final features going on there. See you in the next clip.